Thank you so much, Carmi.
Mary-Frances.
Boy, isn't it good to be back in person?
It's been a long time.
It has been a long time.
It's really nice to be able to see people and
Yeah.
have connection with them, have people actually here in person. I think collectively we have really been missing that social contact, especially in the last 2 years.
And I know you've done a lot of thinking about this. And I'm curious what you think has been most challenging for people during this time.
During the time of a pandemic, anytime it's difficult to see other people, we suffer because we need to belong. This is a term that arose in social psychology, as you probably know, and it really harkens back to the very beginnings of our lives. So when we're born as human beings, unlike many of our cousins in the animal kingdom, we don't come into the world able to take care of ourselves. You know, think about many other species. When they're born, they're up and walking within a few minutes of their birth.
Yeah.
Or they are learning to forage, or they're learning to hunt within days or weeks. And so they become self-sufficient relatively rapidly. As human beings, we are in sharp contrast to that. We do not measure our time to self-sufficiency in days or in weeks or in months. We measure it in decades. And one of the reasons that that matters is that until that time, until we reach that point of self-sufficiency, our very survival as human beings depends on both the ability and the willingness of somebody else to invest in us and to meet literally every need that we have.
Every single need. That is a significant ask.
It's a significant ask, yeah. You might know that every few years the federal government estimates how much it costs to raise a single child from birth through age 18. And right now that cost is projected to be about $250,000.
Wow.
Per child.
Wow.
And that's just the financial cost, right? That's not the cost to sleep. That's not the cost to our careers, to our sanity, right? That's just the financial cost. And the fact is that we do this willingly, and we do it over and over for children. Imagine what else you could do with $250,000.
Especially right now, I'm thinking about a few trips I could take.
Right? I mean, I hear Tahiti is nice.
Yeah.
Right?
It sounds like a strange question to ask, Kory, but how do you understand why we invest that much in our children? What exactly is the motivation that gets us to invest that much in someone else?
It's an interesting question. When you pose that to parents, why do you take care of your children? They look at you like you have taken leave of your senses, because it seems like such an odd thing to ask. But really, when you think about what a significant investment it takes to raise a child and ensure that child's well-being at a cost to yourself, I mean, this is money coming out of your pocket and time and energy and emotional investment toward the well-being of somebody else. That significant an investment requires an equally significant motivator. And for human beings, that motivator is love. When you ask parents, why do you invest in your children? The answer is because I love them.
Yeah.
So love has evolved in the human species for many reasons, but among them to ensure the survival of our species.
Yeah.
A child who can't get someone to love it, who can't get someone to willingly make the investment that it requires for that child to survive, is a child who will not survive infancy.
This is why children are so cute, right?
Well, I think they have to be, you know. That's another motivator, that they come out pretty cute. But, you know, when you think about it, I don't think it's that much of an exaggeration to say that love is really a matter of life or death.
Yeah, of life or death.
Right.
This really reminds me of how important it is that we touch and cuddle our children.
Yeah, it's not enough just to love them.
No.
Right. You may have heard this story before. In the 13th century, there was an emperor named Frederick II. He had a very interesting question that he came up with. at one point. He wanted to know, what language would human beings speak if we weren't taught any particular language? Was there sort of a natural human language that would evolve in kids if they weren't exposed to any particular language in their environment? And so to discover the answer to his question, he instructed a group of providers, healthcare providers, workers, to take care of a group of infants. And the instruction was very clear: feed them, bathe them, clothe them, but don't talk to them, don't cuddle with them, don't pay them any extra attention than is absolutely necessary to meet their immediate needs.
To figure out what they would speak.
Exactly. He
Okay.
wanted to create that sort of experimental condition when they didn't get that linguistic stimulus, basically.
Okay. Right.
Now, Frederick never found the answer to his question, quite unfortunately, because all of the infants died. And that was one of the earliest indications to us that that behavior that we might sort of take for granted, that would be easy to overlook, holding, touching, cuddling, the importance of that kind of affection was far beyond what we understood at the time. And since then, a number of experiments and sort of naturally arising situations in orphanages, for example, have taught us that lesson over and over, that when we don't get that level of touch as infants, we fail to thrive.
Yes.
Right?
Even in World War II, I think some of John Bowlby's work around attachment came out of discovering what orphanages were facing as they were dealing with refugee children and were not able to provide that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it really strikes me that although we're talking about infants and children, that need for social connectedness, it doesn't go away after we end our childhood.
After we emerge out of childhood, no. That need to belong is with us throughout the life course. And interestingly, we know that when we meet that need, when we have the social connection that we feel like we want or need in our lives, then we thrive. And we really see that across the range of human experience. For example, we thrive mentally. We're more optimistic about our lives. We have a higher tolerance for anxiety or difficulty. We just move through our lives in a more positive state. We're less susceptible to things like depression or anxiety disorders. So our mental state is enhanced by social connection because that is such a fundamental human need.
Yes, that social connectedness really changes our mental health.
It absolutely does.
Yeah. And it changes our physical health as well. You know, I'm reminded of some studies done at the university, at the Ohio State University by Janice Key Colt-Glazer and colleagues, where they looked at wound healing. So that is, you know, a space, an injury you get to the skin, the surface of the skin. And because they wanted to do a very standardized experiment, they used what many of us will know from a punch biopsy. So when you get a punch biopsy, it's a very, 3.5 millimeter little circle. Well, what that enables scientists to do is to see how long it takes the skin to knit back together, right? So they can actually measure how quickly a wound heals.
So they would give them the biopsy,
So they
right?
gave them the biopsy.
Okay.
Participants in the study volunteered to have this done and then answered a number of questions about their lives. And one of the questions was about their social connectedness. And here's the interesting thing. Those who had more social connectedness, their wound healed 9 days faster.
Wow.
Isn't that remarkable?
Just that difference.
Just the difference of that social connectedness. It's fascinating to me. And, it isn't even just physical health that we thrive when we have this social connectedness, but our social network creates resources for us as well. So you think about, say, an intergenerational family, a family where maybe grandparents and parents and children all live in the same household. And what we see is that when other people know each other who know us, that type of embedded connectedness, we actually have more resources. So we see, the granddaughter saying to the aunt, boy, grandpa just doesn't have the strength that he used to. And the aunt saying, I was talking with your mom about this. It feels like he's moving more slowly, right? And because of this, those resources enable us to really thrive in all sorts of ways.
So when we have people around us, when we're socially connected that way, we have surveillance,
yes.
right? There are people who notice if we're slurring our words or if we're not moving as quickly, or if we seem to be getting a cough and maybe we need to go to the doctor.
Exactly.
Whereas those kinds of things would be easier to overlook or certainly easier to ignore if we were by ourselves.
Or not even notice.
Right.
If you don't have that connection.
Yeah. So when we have that social connectedness in our lives, almost everything else about our lives is better.
Yeah.
Right? Our health in particular, mentally, physically, socially, is enhanced. And I think many of us in this room would probably agree that's been a tall order the last couple of years.
Boy.
So I'm remembering it was just about this week, 2 years ago, when our university went virtual, when a lot of schools were doing that. And almost overnight, the normal pathways, the normal opportunities for social connection were cut off from us. And not just cut off, but cut off in an era of uncertainty when we didn't know, well, when am I going to get this connection back?
That's right. As we deal with the stress of something as anxiety-provoking as a pandemic is exactly the moment when we can't turn to the people closest to us.
That's right.
Because of social distancing.
And it's the moment when we need them the most,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So we're sitting in this state of limbo almost with respect to our social connections. And that so severely challenges our need to belong.
Yes.
It directly challenges this very primal need that we have as human beings.
That's right. And it did that in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, it was maintaining connections, right?
Right.
Many of us didn't go on that family vacation for 2 summers, right? And at the same time, it was also making new connections, right? So a whole country's worth of high school seniors did not graduate at a graduation ceremony.
Right.
And then the ones that went to college, it was like a red shirt year for freshmen, right? They didn't get to have that experience of moving into the dorm together, moving into apartments together, being in person with each other, and being in person with their professors as well, with you and I.
Social distancing was the term.
It was. I can't even imagine what dating was like, frankly. In any case, it did. It changed the language that we use. This term, social distancing, was not a term we had ever used before, and now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
You have a good term, though, that you've used around this experience we had during the pandemic.
If we can sort of think back a couple of years, I think that a lot of us were feeling the experience almost of a disease, but more specifically of dis-ease. I remember hearing a number of people at the time saying, things just don't feel right now. And often they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was that they were missing, but just their way of being in the world seemed altered. It seemed off. And this is the term that I used, was dis-ease. When things aren't right, we notice that in our bodies. We notice that in our minds and kind of in our skin as we move through the world. And this was an experience that I think so many of us had, even if we couldn't quite name.
Put our finger on
That's
it.
right. We couldn't quite name what it was that we were missing.
Just this vague sense, really.
That's exactly right. And I now think that many of us are feeling almost this sense of collective loneliness. When we talk about loneliness, we almost always talk about that as an individual experience. I feel lonely or you feel lonely. And I think over the last couple of years, we collectively have started to feel that experience, that disconnection or lack of association with the people who round out our lives, with the people who give our lives meaning. And one of the things that is so often easy to overlook about loneliness, and you know this better than anybody, is that it is associated with a range of physical and mental impairments. I often say that if you haven't been through loneliness, or at least intense loneliness before, it can be one of those experiences that's easy to overlook. It's easy to diminish or downplay. And it's easy to say to people who are going through it, well, just get over it. Get out and meet somebody. Get over yourself. The way that we often talk to depressives, people who are experiencing depressive symptoms or anxiety, as if we can just flip a switch and get over that. And I think these days we're recognizing collectively that that sense of shared loneliness that we have is really having an impairment on our health.
It's really impacting us. It reminds me of another study, actually. These are sometimes called the common cold studies from the University of Pittsburgh. And in the common cold study, what they did was they wanted to see how the common cold takes effect in the human body. And so they had another group of volunteers who were willing to come and spend the weekend at a hotel. Now you might think, well, of course, I would go spend a weekend at a hotel. Sure. Someone pays me to be in a study, I'll go to a hotel.
That's right.
The downside was they also were going to have a nasal spray with the common cold virus in it.
They gave them the virus.
They gave them the virus.
I assume with their permission.
With their permission. They were volunteering. And the reason that they did that, this may surprise you, but even when you have the common cold virus introduced directly into your nose, not everyone gets the cold, it turns out. And not everyone gets the same level of symptoms, right? The sniffling and the coughing and the spluttering. They actually weighed how much the Kleenex weighed for these different individuals to get a quantitative measure of the kind of symptoms that they were having.
How much mucus they were producing.
How much mucus they were producing.
That's delightful.
I know.
Yeah.
That's why we call it just the common cold studies. There's probably other names we could come up with. This is the kicker, though. For those people who were participating in the couple of weeks prior to coming to the hotel, they had asked them things about their life. And one of the things they asked was about the social roles that they played, the number of social connected experiences that they were having in the time leading up. And here's the fascinating thing. The people who were having more social connectedness were less likely to get a cold and were likelier to have fewer cold symptoms. Just that experience of social connectedness changed the disease as you described it.
So even though everybody got the virus,
that's right.
Not everybody got a cold, and not everybody got the same level of cold.
That's exactly right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Social connectedness made the difference.
That's right. It does.
I don't know if you feel this way, but it feels to me like all of our social interactions these days are more difficult.
Yes.
We used to be able to rely on habit. We used to be able to rely on familiarity when we interacted with people. And now when we approach each other, we're asking questions that we're not used to asking, like, are we shaking hands? Are we hugging? Do we need to wear a mask? What's our protocol here? Basic social interactions that so many of us just take for granted. They're just easy, right? Yeah. We do them out of force of habit. Now require this whole new sense of negotiation. Permission, yeah. We have to figure it out. What are you and I doing? What are going to be the rules here? And that's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel like every time I go into a space now, having to ask myself, what's going to be the protocol? What are going to be the rules? It weighs us down. I think one of the effects of that is that it's made us a lot more short-tempered with people. And you've probably seen, at least on the news, if not in your own life, experiences of rudeness, people just being really rude and having a short fuse, people who wouldn't necessarily be that way in other instances. And I think part of that is just this sluggishness that we all feel, being weighted down by the things that we have to negotiate, the things that we have to figure out. I remember talking to you about this, and you were telling me about the experience of walking in your neighborhood. Do you remember that story?
I do. This is a great example, I think. So in my neighborhood, often in the late afternoon, early evening, people go for a walk. Often they take their dog for a walk, but sometimes just go for a walk. Mm-hmm. It's a nice neighborhood. And early in the days of the pandemic, before we had a vaccine, for example, where social distancing was really the only thing we had to rely on, as you were walking, you would suddenly have to make a decision, right? One group of people would move into the street and the other would continue down the sidewalk, right? But this is a very unusual behavior, and it happened over and over again. And then are we moving into the street or they moving into the street? And how close do you have to get before you can move into the street? And this simple thing of just the joy of going for a walk was suddenly so difficult and so complicated.
Laden with decision making.
Exactly. Yeah. Weighing the pros and the cons and you think of all that your mind is doing in the background just walking. It's exhausting.
I remember when you and I first started working on this talk and you said, I have a really interesting term for this.
Yes. I have to give credit to my partner actually for this term, but it's Coronagorophobia.
So what is that?
Well, I should say first that agoraphobia is really, technically fear of the marketplace, but it means when we have a fear of being with other people, of going out, and because of that, we avoid going out. We avoid people. And so coronagorophobia is sort of a takeoff on that in this unusual circumstance where everything is so complicated and so hard. It's often just easier to avoid the whole thing, right? It's often just easier to avoid going to the wedding, not knowing if everyone will be vaccinated and whether the wedding will be outside and whether,
Yeah.
It's sometimes easier to just avoid the whole thing.
However,
this is not a good long-term strategy
not.
because exactly of what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Social connectedness is as important to us as life and death. And so avoidance just isn't going to work in the long run.
It's not going to work for us in the long run, no. We are too social a species to be able to hide. So that raises a really interesting question then that I think a lot of people are grappling with now, which is how do we reclaim our social nature? Given what we've been through individually, given what we've been through collectively, where can we turn for guidance, for framing, for context to help us to understand how we not get over this time, how do we get through it?
Yeah. It may sound strange to say, but I actually think that bereaved people have a lot to teach us about how to cope.
Bereaved people.
Yeah, people who have experienced the death of a loved one.
Okay.
To teach us, to help us to understand what can help to cope with what's going on with this sense of social disconnection.
So what would that look like?
Well, to start, I guess I should say that grief is this natural response to loss that we all have.
Okay.
And when you think about grieving, you have to remember that it isn't just grieving the loss of that other person. You're also grieving a loss of part of yourself. So let me put it this way. If you think of the word daughter, the word daughter implies two people, doesn't it? It implies there is another person in the world. It
implies a parent, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And all of these terms, the term spouse implies another person, even though I may be referring to myself, right?
Right.
And so what that means is when we have a loss, it means we've also lost a piece of ourselves, how we function in the world as well. You know what I mean?
I do. So I'm thinking that when people during this pandemic time have lost a job,
yes,
or they've lost their health, or they've lost something of value to them, we're grieving that loss as well. It doesn't have to be the death of somebody, but we are losing parts of ourselves. Is that what you're getting at?
That's exactly what I mean. We've lost ways that we function in the world.
It reminds me of people who are going through bereavement and they'll say things like, I feel like there's a hole in my heart.
Yeah.
Or I feel like I've lost a part of who I am.
Yes.
Right?
You hear that frequently.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. And, it sounds metaphorical, doesn't it? The sort of, I've lost part of myself. But the interesting thing is, it may actually be part of how the brain encodes. So what I mean by that is, you think of you and you think of I, and the brain, of course, encodes you and I, but the brain also encodes we.
Okay.
And so if you think of something called mirror neurons, right? So mirror neurons are a discovery that, let's say you're picking up a glass of water. And of course, I have neurons that fire as you're picking up that glass of water. There are neurons that fire when I pick up a glass of water. But there are neurons that fire both when you do it and when I do it, the we type of neuron.
So it's almost like the same experience in the brain.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That the brain can't tell the difference with the we neurons if you're doing it or I'm doing it.
Right.
And so that idea of losing part of yourself may actually be a part of how we've encoded relationships. We encode a we that has to be then changed.
So when that we isn't there anymore, we sort of lose some of that capability, or we lose that representation in the brain.
That's right.
Interesting.
There may be even a more concrete example that comes from language we would all recognize. So I don't know if this happened to you, but when you're dating, you first move in with someone, there's a period of time where you might say, your couch or my coffee maker. And then eventually over time, you sort of stop saying that, don't you? You just say our couch or, we need to replace our coffee maker, right? And this merging develops over time and is really how we function, how our habits make sense in the world.
Yeah. So it sounds like part of what you're saying is that during this pandemic time, during this time of isolation and being cut off from social connection, we've lost, among other things, a lot of our habits, a lot of our predictions, a lot of our ability to understand and anticipate the world. Like I was talking about before, we come together. Are we hugging?
Yeah.
Are we doing a fist bump, or do we need to wear masks? Is that wedding going to be outdoors? Things like that. Things that we would be better able to anticipate under normal circumstances, and things that are really central to our ability to connect with other people. We've lost a lot of that certainty.
Yes.
And so right now, we are grieving that loss. Does that sum up the point of view of looking at this through a lens of grief?
That's why you've hit the nail on the head. That's why I think thinking about grieving really may help us to put our finger on what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So for people who are grieving, they have to understand, okay, well, I'm still in the world. How do I move forward? How do I operate with the absence of this person? And that's why I think we can carry forward a new understanding into the way we function at work and at school and in our neighborhood. We can carry a new sort of knowledge with us.
So if you think about grieving as in part a learning process, we are having to learn now a new way of being in the world. We're having to learn how to ask questions like, how can we reclaim our social connectedness? How can I feed my need to belong in ways that have been difficult or even impossible during this time? It sort of gets back to what I said before. We're not going to get over this, but we are going to get through it. You were telling me a story in my office the other day about somebody that you knew. Do you remember that story?
I think in thinking about looking to bereaved people, I was talking with an older man whose grandson had died. And he was saying, I'd do anything to go back and change the things that were. But he said, what I've learned is there are so many living people to love as well.
So many people to focus on now.
That's right.
Yeah. So we sort of arrive at that question, what do we do? And, as you and I talked about this, we on one hand thought, well, we might be able to close this presentation by giving some pieces of advice. Try this, try that. Here's a bullet point of things that have worked for other people. And yet I remember as we talked about that, I remember coming to the realization that although we are collectively feeling lonely, although we are collectively grieving the loss of these things that have been important to us in the past, that doesn't mean that the same things are going to work for all of us. And so there's a little bit of a danger in giving advice, right? To say, try this or try that, because it's so easy to look at pieces of advice, especially around something like this, and say to ourselves, well, that's not going to work for me. And so I remember us talking about this and realizing that it can actually be more fruitful, instead of offering suggestions to people, to offer things to think about, questions that we might ask ourselves.
Reflect on.
That's right. That's right. Because the benefit of posing a question is that we can each answer that question differently and in a way that's genuine and in a way that feels right for us. And so one question that has come to my mind during this time is, what does closeness look like to me now?
Now.
Many of us, I've heard this from a number of people, as we led into the time of the pandemic, as we tried to figure out how to negotiate this disconnection from other people, that one thing that happened to many people is that their world shrank.
Yeah.
And by their world, I mostly mean their social circle.
Yeah.
So we recognized that we had some people in our lives who were absolutely essential. We were going to have to figure out, how can I keep these people in my life? How can I bring them into my bubble, so to speak? Another of those terms that we didn't really talk about before. Into your pod. Exactly. But at the same time, we realized that there were some people in our lives who were, for lack of a better term, expendable, right? We realized, I'm not really going to invest the energy in keeping up sort of this strata of relationships, this grouping of people who I thought of as close before. But what's happening now is that our definition of closeness is evolving with this time. So what does close look like to me now? Can be one of those questions that we can reflect on as we individually think about how to navigate our way through this time.
It's almost as though the sense of sort of, who could I face the pandemic with? Who really got it the way that I was facing the pandemic?
Right, treated it in the same way.
Exactly. Yeah. And sort of, those are the people with whom I need to make time, make effort to really intentionally stay close with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Another question that I think about, and this is a tough one.
I know.
It's a tough one for me. It's, what am I avoiding? Right? We talked about the Coronagorophobia, right? The moment of sort of just, I just don't even want to deal with this. And knowing that's not going to work in the long term, eventually, you have to ask yourself, okay, what is the situation I'm avoiding? What is the conversation or the person that I've been avoiding? And is that really a good long-term strategy? How can I go about not avoiding them in a safe way now?
There's a term I think you and I were talking about the other day, and we called it COVID cover.
COVID cover,
right?
Yes.
Do you remember this?
That's right.
So as we were talking about this concept, it was the idea that we, intentionally or not, can use COVID, and sometimes do use COVID, as an excuse to avoid going to a particular event or having a particular conversation, seeing some people, I'm so sorry, I can't make it, COVID and all. It becomes an excuse that allows us to avoid. And yet, like you pointed out before, that's not a sustainable long-term strategy.
That's right. I think sometimes we're not even clear with ourselves, right? Is it actually the fear of Corona, or is it this COVID cover?
Is it COVID cover? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
A final question that you and I talked about the other day that I thought was really interesting is, how can I seize the day? We're in a time now, and it's not our first time here, when it feels like things are getting better.
Yep.
We're feeling a sense of optimism. We're feeling a sense of renewed safety, maybe, to come together. Even the fact that we can all be sitting here right now,
that's right,
is evidence of that. Mm-hmm. And, who knows what might happen next week or next month. But right now, we have the opportunity to seize our day in a way that maybe we don't feel like we've had in quite some time. So what are we going to do with that opportunity?
Yeah.
How are we going to spend that?
Yeah.
How are we going to capitalize on this chance to be together, to rekindle existing connections and or to make new ones? What are the things that each of us can do today as we move forward out of this very gathering to capitalize on what's being presented to us so far?
You described it to me in one conversation as we do have so many losses, and at the same time we've also gained a lot, even in just knowledge and experience and deepening of some of our connections.
In perspective and in the idea of what matters to us and who matters to us.
Right.
And like you said, we've gained in our understanding of loss.
That's right, exactly. And in a few minutes, we're going to invite some of the audience to also talk with us about their experience. But I just have to say, Kory, getting a chance to build this presentation together, getting a chance to really talk and connect with you has genuinely been a really new aspect that would not maybe have come about except for the pandemic, something I really enjoyed. So thank you.
And valued, yes, absolutely. And we value the chance to be here with you today.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We thought we might open our discussion today by throwing the question out to you all. What have you been avoiding?
What have you been avoiding? Do you have a good COVID cover story? In-laws.
You've been avoiding your in-laws. Oh.
Say more about that. This is being recorded. It's a great example, though, right? Where you have a stressful social situation already, and now maybe trying to understand, but what is important about this situation? Is this a social connection that I need to figure out how to make it work?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, your situation was opposite. Ah.
That kind of drifted apart. So that was so wonderful and so meaningful that now as we're getting now my grieving starts because things
Oh, right. It's creating space now for you to reflect in a way that maybe you haven't done before. Yeah.
There was such an importance about those connections during the pandemic. And now as sort of we go back to the before times, not really the before times, but we go back to some of our habits. Now suddenly the question is, are we going to invest in these social connections in the same way? And, I had friends I saw every Thursday night and every Sunday afternoon outside. And the question is, will we keep doing that?
Yeah, that's right. We've also created new habits during this time.
Yeah.
New social habits. And some of those we may fall by the wayside as well as we return to whatever normalcy is going to look like post-pandemic.
The new normal.
That's right. What else is on your minds, or what's been sort of dimensions of your own experiences in navigating this time of having to figure out how to meet your social needs?
Did any of your contact lists change?
Or shrink?
Or shrink. We certainly found some of that.
I imagine they would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that's something we hear from bereaved people as well.
Is that right?
That's right. So, when you lose a loved one, some people are able to be there for you. Sometimes people you didn't even expect. And then in other ways, people you thought you were close with maybe it isn't really your
Maybe
connection.
it's sort of fallen by the wayside.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think in part because sometimes we don't really know how to talk to grieving people.
That's right.
Don't you think that's true?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of an opportunity to really reflect on what loss feels like. I think that can be useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I really want to thank the University of Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
And I hope you will continue this afternoon in the wonder that we all have here.
Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
being here.